Week 15 recaps, starting out with the Packers versus Seahawks. Off the rip, with clips of Andre Dillard getting punked up, the former Seahawk who became a Packer, I don't even know when. Then you had a monologue from Mike Holmgren on the Sunday Night Football program, talking about his tenure, or divisive tenure rather, with both squads. And then you had John Ryan. I don't need to put his full government name out there, but yeah, former Seahawks punter John Ryan raising the 12th man flag in the stadium prior to the start of the game. This was supposed to be one for the ages in a game which the Seahawks were supposed to win, to be honest, to continue to have that supremacy in the NFC West and get themselves a little closer to a playoff spot at the very least. Instead, immediately, they ran Josh Jacobs right down the Seahawks defense's throat, man, right down there. Now, granted, the last time that Josh Jacobs stepped foot in Seattle, he killed them as a part of the Raiders. And I infamously remember just absolutely quitting after that. He completely torched them in the rushing attack. And that didn't stand to cease here, to be honest. He would easily get in the end zone for a 1 yard rushing touchdown after just running the entire time. It was literally pretty much all him, except for a Jordan Love scramble for short yardage. And there was only one passing play as well, technically speaking. It's just absurd. The offense, again, slow starts for them are truly the name of the game, and that wouldn't stop here. They would go 3-and-out pretty easily. Well, after counted one first down, they would punt the ball away, and then the Packers would go on another fairly long touchdown drive. You get some other individuals involved from there. Now, Jaden Reed would get a short catch, and Josh Jobe would make a pretty sure tackle, but that meant nothing because Romeo Doubs on the next play would get 13-yard touchdown catch to open up the game 14-0 at the end of the first quarter. The Hawks would go on a field goal drive aided by contributions from Jackson Smith-Njigba. At this point, you can't really be surprised. The man was on pace to get his first 1,000-yard season. And he's only 4 yards away at the time of this video. So he didn't get it in this game. He surely got close, and he really was one of the only effective players on the offensive end. Which is good as that can be. That also may have to change a little bit. I don't know if it's just pressure affecting the progressions or so be it, but that's not always the greatest recipe for success. The Seahawks defense would shore up a little bit and hold the Packers to a field goal. I mean, they had some pretty solid ways of extending their possession. A 36-yard catch by Christian Watson aided them on their quest. And he actually made a pretty solid adjustment to the ball. So I have to credit him with that. But still, improvement from the defense rather than just letting them run the ball down their throats. Seahawks had a chance to at least match with a field goal or a touchdown, get some kind of points on the board. But you couldn't finish off this drive without scoring anything. And some solid conversions by Jake Bobo and a solid defensive penalty kept things going for them. Jackson Smith-Njigba and Tyler Lockett would force the defense to get a little desperate, and they would draw some more fouls. That led to pretty solid positions on the field. Yet, on 3rd and 9, inside Green Bay's red zone, for whatever reason, they had a double corner route on the left side of the field, and Geno Smith chose to throw it to Tyler Lockett. He wasn't necessarily ready for it, and it was intercepted by Carrington Valentine. A tough drive that just may have very well drove the needle in their backs. And to make things even worse, you would have Tucker Kraft get the luckiest of catches by boxing out Seahawks defenders on one of the plays to open up Green Bay's ensuing drive. Later on in that same drive, Tariq Woolen would foul Romeo Doubs as he was coming back to the ball. And they really had a shot of putting this game up by a score of 24-3. I'm not going to lie to you. They could have went for a touchdown. And to be honest, first and goal on the 3-yard line, they were thinking about it. Matt LaFleur was thinking about it. But wisely, an exchange of timeouts were called. And luckily for the Seahawks, the Packers could only muster a field goal. So the game was 20-3 at halftime. Punts would ensue for both squads. And for the Seahawks defense especially, the second half, you could look at it and say it wasn't successful. At the same time, they did everything they needed to do in a way. The splits for Josh Jacobs rushing in the first and second half were complete. In total, 360. Like, seriously. He had very little yards per carry, and he was not as effective on the ground, which is exactly what they needed to do to stop him, right? And everything else would come to form, naturally speaking. One thing that did not help, though, is that Geno Smith would be hurt after Edgerrin Cooper, the rookie edge rusher for the Packers, attempted to sack him. He very much twisted an area of his leg, and he was taken out for what would eventually be the rest of the game. In comes Sam Howell, and the game was effectively over there. They would later score a field goal in this drive, and the Packers would respond with a field goal of their own. Now, there were chances here. Again, like I say, defense did what they were supposed to do in the second half to give the offense chances when it mattered the most. But Sam Howell just... this is Sam Howell we're talking about. This is a man that threw 21 touchdowns and 21 interceptions last season. Still, you feel at some point he could have tried to lock in a little better and lead the offense to more scoring. Like, again, think about this time last year, right? You have Drew Lock entering the game. You know what his reputation is, and even he was able to muster a game-winning drive when it mattered the most. When Geno Smith got hurt in that Eagles game on Monday Night Football. So, like, what? There's not necessarily an excuse, but I guess, again, different offense, fair play. It was there for the taking. Not only were they making Josh Jacobs ineffective, but Ernest Jones IV would also force a fumble on him. And Julian Love would recover it. That would lead to the only Seahawks touchdown of the night, scored by Zach Charbonnet on a 24-yard run. You force Green Bay to turn it over on downs. Something very well could have happened there. And even on the drive before. But again, that ended in a punt. Then you have Edgerrin Cooper getting in coverage and working Sam Howell for an interception. The final touchdown of the game was honestly interesting at that point. I really could not... I had nothing to say about it, man. Jordan Love launched that bitch up. It got so close to the ground So they were checking it on the scoring review, and Romeo Doubs actually managed to get his hands under it just in the nick of time. It was honestly impressive. I couldn't complain at that point. After that, again, final score was 30-13. You just had a couple of punts traded between both teams. And the Seahawks at that point just decided to run out the clock. There was no point of trying anymore at that point. What I will say is that for Josh Jacobs this night, he did finish with 136 combined yards, 94 rushing, and the aforementioned rushing touchdown. His 13 rushing touchdowns in his first season as a Packer would be the most in such a situation since both Billy Houghton and Amon Green's seasons with the team. Jordan Love performed relatively well, and I guess he has been on a similar trend, as similar of a trend as last season's, right? He would start out these respective seasons just being a turnover machine. He hasn't thrown a single interception after his bye week this year. And that continued here. 2 touchdowns, no picks, on 74.1% completion from the field, and 229 yards passing. This was really a team effort thing. I mean, Romeo Doubs had the 2 touchdowns and 40 yards receiving. Christian Watson had 56 yards and 3 receptions. But when you look at it, 7 different receivers were able to get their hands on the ball for the Packers and just spreading the ball around and keeping the defense honest, really. If you're not necessarily able to run the ball straight up the middle like they were trying to do for most of the night, at the very least, you can try to spread out the defense to open up that rushing attack, which is how they were so effective in the first half. As for the Seahawks, it was just rough overall. Both quarterbacks entered the game and threw picks. Sam Howell only finished with 24 yards passing on 35.7% completion. And Geno Smith had 149 yards passing and 78.9% completion. And his aforementioned interception when he was playing. Yes, Zach Charbonnet finished with 54 yards rushing on 8 carries and the touchdown. That's misleading. I'll be the first to say it. It was misleading because when on those drives where they needed to at least match the scoring the Packers were putting up, they had to match these scores. And without an effective rushing attack, again, you're going to be made into a one-dimensional football team. And when you have no additional element to add to at least confuse the defense and mix things up, if you don't have the most elite personnel running the offense, you're not necessarily going to succeed by just being one-dimensional. There are a few quarterbacks that can get away with that. And even for those guys, it rarely happens today. Being in Geno Smith's position where he's one of the better quarterbacks you can have in the league today, not necessarily considered elite by most pundits, there lies a problem. And also, as the Seahawks coaching staff, he doesn't do well under pressure. His numbers are horrible when he's under pressure. Absolutely atrocious. I'm not saying that you can give him a clean pocket all the time. That never happens to anyone. But at the very least, you want your O-lineman to be able to give him good, clean pocket to work with more often than not, to keep him clean and keep the offense as effective as it can be. But the tackles just, I don't know what Abraham Lucas, I'll call out Charles Cross too, as solid as he has been, and I'll say Laken Tomlinson as well. Those three guys did not do the most optimal jobs at their respective assignments in the game. They didn't. They completely let those edge rushers, which with the Packers were one of the worst units in terms of rushing the passer coming into the game. They had a feast. They were just able to power and speed right past these O-linemen. What I will say did impress me on the line is that Oluwatimi would go down with an injury and he would be out for the rest of the game. In comes an offensive lineman in Nick Sundell that only played 9 snaps for the season. They put him in at center, and I thought that was going to be chaotic. I didn't think that was a position that he knew how to play. But instantly, this dude just starts making some productive decisions. He's pull blocking at the right times. He's fully countering all of the blitzes that they're trying to pull off because instantly, yes, you have somebody playing out of position, technically speaking. You're going to try to attack him. He was ready for it. And he was a very bright spot for an offense that struggled in the game, and just it's been that way for the entire season. When I look at it, it's an offensive struggle. Yes, the defense allowed 30 points, and they allowed 20 in the first half. But when push came to shove, the offense was given opportunities ad nauseum by the defense in the second half. They made the adjustments they needed to make. And ultimately, the final possession that saw them get the touchdown, I mean, at that point, I won't say they're exhausted, but it's like, dude, there's just a lot of burn there. They just got off the field a few minutes ago, and they have to go right back on because the offense can't control the time of possession at all. Seahawks only had the ball for 27 minutes in the game. That's just ridiculous. And could only muster 3.7 yards a carry. You're not going anywhere. So how do you expect them to ultimately be able to hold off the Packers for long enough? They could have been more consistent in the first half, but I can't put this on them completely. Again, Jackson Smith-Njigba with 10 receptions for 83 yards in the game. That's tremendous. Tyler Lockett did muster a catch. DK Metcalf only had 3. That's something that needs to be figured out too. I mean, I would have to assume that it really comes down to what Grubb is calling. I mean, there's a lot of screen action, a lot of very short in-breaking routes, rather than entrusting guys like DK Metcalf to go and get the ball, or entrusting Tyler Lockett a little more than he has this season. I mean, again, there are a lot of weapons to feed, but a lot of these plays don't seem to scheme Tyler Lockett or DK Metcalf in their favorable spots on the field. It's great to see that Jackson Smith-Njigba is doing what he's doing, but in a way, even his routes are not necessarily they're not straight up routes. Sometimes he even has to adjust his routes on the fly because it's like, what is this? How is one supposed to get open on this route? He's finding a way. And that could happen with everyone else. But with, again, a very sure-handed wide receiver in Tyler Lockett, and a very physical wide receiver with blazing speed in DK Metcalf, you got to find better ways to scheme them open, I would think. Tough drop for the Seahawks, and also, again, was looking scary because, tell you what, the Seahawks, with this loss, are in the hunt, and the team that I will talk about later actually managed to clinch their playoff berth with the Seahawks loss. All I was thinking about was what was going on with Geno Smith, because if Sam Howell was going to be the guy that had to lead the way for the rest of the season, there was no chance. I thought that there was at least another backup quarterback on the roster. There wasn't. It's just Smith and Howell. There's no way that Howell's the guy to lead them to where they need to be over the next few games. So it was very important to hear what was going on with Geno. And the most recent update that I saw was that they believe that Geno Smith could appear in the next game. They have high optimism. They're very optimistic in his ability to play in the next game against the Vikings, which is going to be a tough one. Yes, that's another NFC North team. Understandable. But, ultimately, you have to tighten up. The Vikings, the Bears, and then the Rams, which brings me to a perfect segue into the Rams versus 49ers game. Let's talk about it. You can't really ask me fully about the first quarter, and I will say part of the second. Merely got up to watch the game through the middle of the Rams' second quarter drive to open things up for them. Because I was just very much out of it, very sick. I needed to rest in some capacity. Turns out, I get on, I open up the game, see what's going on. Now, I didn't miss a damn thing. Only 3 points on the board. Like, okay, we got a big defensive battle. And fitting that in a defensive battle, one of the better players on the 49ers defense returned in Dre Greenlaw, as he would see his first action of the season after going down in the Super Bowl. Keep in mind, when I talk about what needs to be talked about later, you've already heard a little bit about it from pretty much everywhere. Dre Greenlaw was supposed to be out for this next season, to be completely honest. The ACL injury that he suffered in the Super Bowl, less than 10 months ago to that point, should have kept him out for this entire season. So the fact that he recognized that the 49ers, to that point, were still in the hunt and they needed some reinforcements, he decided to kind of muscle up a little bit and get back out there. Yeah. So he would go on and have a pretty productive game while he was in. Had the most tackles on the team and was one of their better players out there in coverage. Paid off, too, because Matthew Stafford would miss several passes on this drive that led to a Rams punt. The 49ers, tried to respond, but they could not get their run game going at all. And of course, they were made out to be one-dimensional in a way, albeit with depleted weapons. I mean, yes, you still have George Kittle, you have Deebo Samuel Sr., and you have Jaywan Jennings, and Ricky Pearsall was merging just a little bit, but Deebo Samuel has been underwhelming this season, and you're trying to rely on these guys. Don't know how optimal that really is. Kobe Turner for the Rams would also have a game. Again, he's learned a lot from spending that season with Aaron Donald. So that's not necessarily surprising to me. The Rams would get on a field would get a field goal of their own. Because that punt is so bad to the point where they were given an easy field to work with, and still no touchdowns here. Just 3 Kyren Williams runs to get them in range in a very short Puka catch for 48-yard field goal attempt by Joshua Carty, which should end up being good. Deebo Samuel would get a short catch to start out this next drive, and then Brock Purdy would do what Brock Purdy does, completely miss targets, and they punted again. By that point, it was just best to end off the half. Now, granted, the 49ers passing defense to that point had held the Rams passing offense to a net negative 3 yards passing, I believe, which is great. Again, if defense is the name of the game, also with the fact that inclement weather was prevalent in the first half. It was raining completely out there. The grass field there was getting muddy up with all of those elements in play. So it's understood. 11 punts in the first half were also tied for the most in this season. More just uneventful things would go on for the Rams here. I mean, there's not necessarily, at the very least, the 49ers would get a field goal in response to this drive here. Isaac Grando would get involved a little bit before Jake Moody banged it in. Those would be their final points of the night. Literally. The Rams mounted a 9-minute and 45-second drive that bled into the early parts of the fourth quarter, only for them to settle for yet another field goal. Do you realize how ridiculous that sounds? Still, even with all that, you had time to do something, and the 49ers could not answer that call. They could not. Deebo Samuel didn't help matters. That very play saw him drop a slant wide open over the middle. That could have been a touchdown. Subsequently, on that next possession, completely misses a chance to get a deep pass, and they have to once again put the ball in the hands of the Rams, who they know at this point are just going to find different ways to move down the field as, I guess, I can't necessarily say effectively, but they were doing everything they needed to do in order to strategically milk the clock down and find a way to get points somehow. There was at least one explosive play, and that would come from none other than Puka, because why not? You would think that Cooper Kupp would have a bit more involvement here, but he actually went the first 3 quarters without a single catch. He wouldn't get active here. I just have to preface this. It would be all Kyren Williams from here on out, despite them being inside the 49ers' 10-yard line. Another Josh Carty field goal, and another chance for the 49ers. You're thinking that Ricky Pearsall gets a 16-yard catch and George Kittle picks up another first down for them. There's maybe a solid chance that they could come away with the lead here. But Brock Purdy decides to play hero ball at the worst time when all he needed to do was hit at least one short route. And on replay, there looked to be a fair pool of open routes to choose from underneath. He goes for the heavily contested deep shot, trying to get it all in one play when he didn't have to, and he was promptly intercepted by the former Ram, and then now in his second stint, cornerback Darius Williams. The Rams would get another field goal, and the game would end anticlimactically. There was a chance for Brock Purdy to throw a Hail Mary, but he don't have that kind of arm in the first place, and he couldn't even get the protection he needed to get the ball off in the second place. Just horrible play call. Horrible play calling. Honestly, you can say for both offenses, just not a lot going on. But from a defensive standpoint, and as a person that can appreciate defensive games, hey, I'm all for it. I'll get into the numbers. Brock Purdy, less than 50% of his passes completed in an interception, with Isaac Granda only mustering 57 yards on the ground. George Kittle had 61 yards receiving. No other wide receiver had more than 32. Jaywan Jennings had 31, and Deebo Samuel Sr. only had 16, with 5.3 yards a fucking catch. Horrible. Horrible. Again, like I said, Drake Greenlaw came in with 8 tackles, but he would be re-injured. I'll get further into why that's important in just a second. Meanwhile, for the Rams, you have Matthew Stafford getting only under 60 yards passing. Kyren Williams with 29 rushes for 108 yards. And Bucanacula with 97 receiving yards. No other receiver had over 22, as Colby Parkinson would have 21. In fact, true wide receivers outside of Bucanacula only had 1 catch for 6 yards, coming from none other than Tutu Atwell. And yes, my illusion would be correct here. Cooper Kupp did not finish with a single catch in this game. None. And they still found a way to win the game. That's just an embarrassment to the 49ers offense completely. Like, the 49ers defense held that weapon in check. Yes, they allow Pucanacua to get going at pretty much the right time. But for pretty much 95% of the game, the Rams couldn't do a fucking thing when push came to shove. That's very productive, if I do say so myself. But they still needed the right reinforcements out there to make plays. And Jerry Greenlaw would go down with injury. So now we get into a situation where Devondre Campbell Sr., who was picked up by the 49ers this season, was called upon to re-enter the game after losing his starting job, which was bound to happen because he was merely filling in for Dre Greenlaw while he was slated to miss all of this time. Now that he was back, he was no longer the man on this linebacker unit for the team. So they are trying to get him to come into the game. And he essentially says, fuck y'all, I'm not entering this game. I'm not playing today. I didn't want to play today. And he walks off the field prior to the start of the fourth quarter, I believe. Leaving D. Winters, I believe, to take that middle linebacker role and enter the game. The fallout from that shit was just fucking crazy. All the pundits were on his ass. Former players who found themselves in the media were on his ass. Kyle Shanahan was not having it for a second. He wanted his ass out. And teammates had zero tolerance for it. George Kittle would have his opinion about it, but the most telling, the most revealing one came from none other than Charvarius Ward, who, keep in mind, was playing this game mere weeks or so after, unfortunately, losing his young, very young daughter. But he was playing out there. He wasn't necessarily saying anything about not playing or trying to give up on the team, and yet that's exactly how he viewed what Devondre Campbell did. Calling it sucker stuff and alluding to the fact that he may very well be cut to. As cruel and as crushing as that sounds, they have a point. You're going to war with these people week in, week out, and Ward himself is in a time of very deep grief. And yet he's taking time away from his family to spend with individuals that he may consider brothers. So when you have your brother that you're going to war with week in, week out, quitting on a team, well, now things change a little bit. It was so sudden and unwarranted because you were placing your priorities over the team's priorities, which at that point was the ability to come away with a win and keep the playoff hopes alive. Now, with them having their 6-8 record, they're probably not getting in. They're still in the hunt, yes, but they lost the divisional game to the Rams. Well, they lost both of their divisional games against the Rams. Just think about that. They lost a divisional game against the Seahawks, and they lost a divisional game against the Cardinals earlier in the year. There's almost no way that they can overcome that now. Seriously. So it might be a wrap. And I initially thought that there was a report that stated that Devondre Campbell Sr. was cut after this. But there was a development that's a little more interesting that I will tap into later on when I get around to general developments in the league. On a quality win for the Rams, and given the results of the Seahawks game that I mentioned earlier, they have the lead in the NFC West and a 3 seed. Tough. Moving on to the Ravens and Giants. So in this game, the Giants would give Tommy DeVito the go, and no. Justice Hill, for whatever reason, would actually manage to get a very solid return that ended up placing the Ravens offense with a first down on the Giants' 37-yard line. Zay Flowers would instantly pick up another first down. And then the announcers would allude to the fact that Lamar Jackson has a 23-2 record against the NFC, and one of those losses came against the Giants. We know how bad that is. But it turns out that the announcers didn't fully understand the weight their words had. Lamar Jackson would pick up another first down, but Dory Jackson had something to say about that. punches the ball right out of his hands immediately after they get past this point. And the Giants take the ball away. What a waste of a possession to start out of the game. And you literally can't get sloppier than that. Unfortunately for the Giants, even with them getting the ball back and playing respectable defense, nope. They would punt. They would force a punt of their own, and then they would punt again. Right? Very predictable Giants sequence. Highly. Now, it was a short punt, and Desmond King would place them with another first down deep inside Giants territory. Lamar Jackson would subsequently try to expose Greg Stroman Sr., Jr., which he pretty much did. There's no shaking that one. Completely fucked that nigga up, bro. Derrick Henry would also get in the mix, which does not take much. It really doesn't. These are the Giants we're talking about. They thought that they were really going to be safe from his wrath. I don't think so. Lamar Jackson would throw a hell of a hassle to Mark Andrews from 13 yards out to get the first score of the game. It would really just be all Ravens from here. And to tell you any different would be lying to pretty much everybody. Like, you know, man. The Giants would turn the ball over on downs after Tyrone Tracy Jr. and Tommy DeVito would do just a little bit. Well, on 4th and 1, for whatever reason, they tried to get this man Tommy DeVito to run a QB sneak. That shit did not work even remotely, and Darius Washington and Malik Harrison stopped him in his tracks right there. The Ravens would just begin to drive down the field. And I mean drive down the field. There's no other way to sum this up. Another one would be thrown to Rashad Bateman, and he would expose both Jason Pinnock, of course Jason Pinnock, and Greg Stroman Jr., shaking them out of their shoes and getting a 49-yard touchdown catch. With the help of Daniel Bellinger and Wan'Dale Robinson, the Giants eventually respond after a perfectly meticulated drive that saw them take 8 minutes and 38 seconds off the clock, 13 plays, and 80 yards with a very short Devin Singletary run for the touchdown. That still didn't really tip the momentum in their favor. It did not. That did absolutely nothing. Justice Hill with a 14-yard gain. Rashad Bateman with a first down. And then Lamar Jackson with a very, very elite scramble. This is typical for him. Just completely rattling the defense with pure skill. Like, I mean, that's just not... It's not fair sometimes. But given the fact that he is as dynamic as he is, most people, not all, most people have come to accept it. Some people just hate it. Too bad, I guess they can just keep hating. Rashad Bateman would get another 20-yard touchdown catch with another elite pass by a person who apparently can't throw the football. Okay. The Giants would be down 21-7 at the end of the half, just accentuating the point that they have had the worst margin of victory in the first half for a team since the 2008 Lions, who went 0-16. These Giants happen to have 2 wins on the season. Somehow, it shows you a lot about how much things have really changed over the past 16 years. If you mean to tell me that you can have something on par with a winless squad and manage to not be winless, you're still trash as shit. But, okay. These niggas, for whatever reason, I thought they were just teasing the masses. They brought in Tim Boyle, thinking that they would mount a comeback with him. Far from the case. It took just a little bit, a few fluky plays for him, but they would punt the ball again. And then it became the Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson show. This is what you've come to expect, though, right? Greg Stroman Jr. and Brian Burns would go out over the course of this drive. But by the end of it, multiple things happened. One, on a play that saw Lamar Jackson get a 10-yard run, he would become the second such quarterback to reach the 6,000-yard rushing mark. So that's definitely a big ups to him. I'm shocked he didn't do it faster, but at the same time, with what he has been doing in terms of packing on weight and trying to conserve his body a little more, I do understand why it took long. Still, nevertheless, he would drive it down with the passing game, and ultimately on a 3rd and 1, on a play that was called perfectly by Todd Monken, they motion Devontae Walker, and he is schemed open perfectly for one of the easier passes that Lamar Jackson will ever have for the rest of his career, getting a 21-yard touchdown on his very first NFL catch, I may add. So that was nice. The Giants would try to one-up it, but again, they turned the ball over on downs. They were inside Baltimore territory on their 2-yard line, but truly didn't end up mattering. Not at all. The Ravens would drive 98 yards down the field for another touchdown, as Justice Hill would manage to get a 27-yard touchdown catch for some reason. And Nelson Aguilar, also on this drive, would manage to come down with a contested catch. Didn't think he had that in him at all. Giants would end up getting on the board after some gaffes by the Ravens defense, which is typical for this unit this season, as one of the most penalized teams, the most penalized team in the league, I believe. They would give Malik Neighbors a touchdown, though, from 23 yards out, his first touchdown since week 3. As one of the promising rookie wide receivers out there, it can be argued that he's having probably the best season from all of the rookie wide receivers to this point. And it has gone to complete and utter waste. Now, we can also argue that it is a byproduct of them not having a lot of weapons to work with. And that somebody's got to get the brunt of the targets. But I would counter that and say that with some of the plays that he's made, he's shown you he has the talent to command that number 1 role. So why wouldn't he get all the targets? Why wouldn't he get all these receptions and yards? Yet with the lack of touchdowns, he's not necessarily getting treated like a number one when it should count, when you should be looking for him. And also, these quarterbacks, you have overarching issues, yes. So maybe, I guess Neighbors could be the fair selection. But you have to rebuild this offense completely. None of the quarterbacks out there for you this season, and Daniel Jones and Drew Lock and Tommy DeVito and Tim Boyle, are talented enough to not give away their primary read. More often than not, it would be Malik Neighbors. They don't necessarily know how to go through their progression. They don't know how to go through their progressions and make alternative plays. If they see something, they're going to go for it. That's the mentality that all of those guys have. And then others are just too passive at times. Like, just because, yes, it doesn't work one time doesn't mean that you should stop going to Malik Neighbors and just completely make him a non-factor in some of these games. The Ravens would just be set on trying to run the clock out, but Tim Boyle would give Darius Washington an interception. And thus, the game would be over, finally, to end all the torture for the Giants fans. Lamar Jackson would have 290 yards passing, more touchdowns, 5, than incompletions, 4, on 84% completion from the field. A slower game for Derrick Henry with 67 yards rushing, but again, they weren't too set on using him as much as they could have, because if they really wanted to, he would kill this Giants unit. A Giants unit that does not have Dexter Lawrence II, by the way. He's still out. Rashad Bateman and Justice Hill would lead the receivers for the team with 80 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns, and 61 receiving yards and a touchdown, respectively. Mark Andrews and, again, Devontae Walker would have the aforementioned touchdown catches of their own. I don't even think there's really much to look at for the Giants here in terms of numbers. Nothing's going to jump out at you. Nothing's going to jump out at you now. What I can say is that the Giants have, to this point, not won a single game at home. Keep in mind that their only winless season at home came back in 1974. They have one more home game against the Indianapolis Colts on December the 29th. If they don't win that game, they would go winless in New Jersey. Now, for the first time in 50 fucking years. Need I say more than that? It's just utterly embarrassing. As for the Ravens, though, they ride momentum a little bit, I guess. You're coming off a bye week. You're getting the easy win that you should get. And you are rolling into a fucking gauntlet. Rolling into an absolute madhouse over the next 3 games. They face Steelers on December 21st, this Saturday, along with all the other CFP action, which is a completely different story, and it's going to be difficult trying to keep up with all of that. There's going to be a way found. Then on Christmas, you're facing off against the Texans, another tough team, and then the Browns are out of the playoffs, but you face them on the final game of the season, and we know what happened to them the first time they played them this season. Lost in crushing fashion. It's a good win to start out. But if you want to get supremacy in the AFC North and secure a good seed in the playoffs, there's a good chance they have to go undefeated over this stretch. A very good chance. They have to win every single game, or they're kind of screwed. Moving on to the Saints versus the Commanders. This was also watched briefly. I was alternating in between both the Ravens versus the Giants and the Saints versus the Commanders. But it looks like, again, not a lot of context, it seems, was missed here. I mean, Jake Haener struggled. And as ironic as it was, like, you had to see it coming. There was literally a collage of a photo shoot that he had with somebody with just the craziest of poses. And I'm like, yo, don't please just do relatively solid in the game to avoid any backlash for this. That did not happen. And he would actually get taken out of the game later on. But that's a little further down the line. As for the Commanders, though, they got true to their roots pretty much instantly. They gave Terry McLaurin a little pass, but they were just running and churning the trenches of the Saints defense down the field. It did work against them, nearly, as Jaden Daniels would actually fumble and get the ball pushed back somehow. Then, the Washington trenches would start selling them. But Terry McLaurin would scramble out left and just completely buy himself as much time as possible to throw an absolute laser to a leaping Terry McLaurin for the touchdown. Of course, the Ohio State man is capable of making that play. You crazy? You crazy? Like, come on, man. Saints would just give the ball up again. And, like, that makes sense. They would get Terry McLaurin and De'Ami Brown activated on their ensuing drive before Bijan Robinson took the life completely out of Alontae Taylor. Luckily for him, Pete Werner, the other Ohio State man, would help him out with a gang tackle and get him down very short of the sticks. Subsequently, there would be a penalty on that ensuing third down prior to a Cameron Jordan sack. And the Commanders were forced to give the ball back to the Saints. The Saints were generous enough to allow the rookie Mike Sanderstill to get it back for them. Because, of course, on that ensuing drive, all they needed was 5 minutes and 47 seconds to work with. Jaden Daniels would move them down the field methodically, scrambling around a little bit, hitting Zach Ertz for a productive play that got them to New Orleans' 3-yard line, where Terry McLaurin would make his mark again with another touchdown catch. Effectively, the half would be done after the teams traded a couple of punts. And the Commanders would open it up with a field goal. Now, here is where things get really interesting, because prior to that point, the Commanders had been very effective in the red zone since week 10, as at least every 6 in 7 of their red zone drives resulted in touchdowns, changing with that field goal. And the Commanders would be picking up more first downs than the Saints would have passing yards. passing yards. So they had to make an adjustment. And in would come Spencer Rattler eventually. Zach Ertz would also come out of the game with an injury of his own. It took a struggle because he was ineffective. Wasn't necessarily turning the ball over, but he was inefficient. When the deep passes hit, though, they hit. A 39-yard catch by Marquez Valdes-Scantling would get them down just near the Commanders' red zone. And they would then try a gimmick with Cedric Wilson Jr. throwing it from the left side of the field all the way to the right side, with Alvin Kamara coming down with a beautiful, damn near one-handed catch on the boundary to put the Saints on the board for the first time in the game. The Commanders would have something to do about that. They would get a field goal of their own. Of course, Terry McLaurin Jr. will get involved on this play. When it comes to the Saints, they would have another chance to do something. Foster Moreau would get a solid conversion prior to their job stolen out, and Blake Group having to settle for another field goal for the team. There was still a chance, but with a quarterback that had just become the fourth rookie all-time with 3,000 passing yards and at least 500 rushing yards, akin to Cam Newton, Robert Griffin III, and Kyler Murray, you would think that the Commanders would have done away with this thing completely. It looked like that was going to happen, too. They were near midfield with a chance to get in field goal range and put some extra points on the board. But Terry McLaurin managed to rarely drop a routine pass from Jaden Daniels. He was wide open. He just missed it completely. That offset every ounce of progress they made on this drive, as Carl Granderson would eventually sack Jaden Daniels and force the ball back in the hands of the Saints. He would find Spencer Rattler, Marquez Valdes-Scantling again. And once more, their job would stall out, but they were in field goal range. I didn't think the group had enough range to kick a 51-yard field goal, but here we are. This is 2024. Now, on this ensuing Commanders drive, Kool-Aid McKinstry would be taken out of the game and intended to. You would have Jaden Daniels getting highly involved with the tight ends this time. You got Ben Snott, the rookie from Kansas State, getting some action in here. You got John Bates picking up a nice third down conversion. And you have Olamide Zaccheaus actually getting his hands activated and picking up a 13-yard catch on a second down. A De'Ami Brown catch that went for 23 yards would have ended the game if not for Nick Allegretti drawing a penalty. They tried to get enough going to push them back into reasonable field goal range, and they believed that it was done. Brian Robinson would get 7 yards, and they would be down on New Orleans' 36 on 4th and 16. Now, they have Greg Joseph in the game. He'd been handling the kicking duty for the Commanders in this one, because they still have a lot of their guys on IR. This is the problem with Greg Joseph. He would miss the field goal from 54 yards out. Now the Saints They did not have much to work with. Just one timeout, 1 minute and 55 seconds left. But shorter field. Would they be able to do something? They were going for it. A lot of short passes were incorporated on the part of Spencer Rattler, and Kendre Miller would also see a lot of burn on this drive. Ultimately, you get to a 3rd and 3 on Washington's 8-yard line with them not having a single timeout left. There would be an incomplete pass thrown, and on 4th down, Spencer Rattler would actually hit Fabian Moreau up for a 7-yard gain. He was tackled just short of the end zone, which could have caused disaster. But luckily, everybody understood the assignment, and they got on the ball immediately to spike it with just 5 seconds left. All it took was him finding Foster Moreau, in the flats again. And this time was for a very short touchdown catch. Now, Darren Reitze had a decision to make. Do you go and tie the ball game, trying to get into overtime with a commander squad that, if they get the coin toss in the first drive, could effectively run their way down the field and score the game-winning touchdown? Granted, similar in the game, in regulation, they had done exactly that on one of their very first drives. Do you let that happen, or do you try to win this game on your own terms and not leave it up to chance? Reitze would go with the latter, as they would try to get a 2-point conversion to take the lead and the victory, but it fell incomplete. So the Commanders would come away with this one, with a 20-19 win. Jaden Daniels would have 2 touchdown passes, 80.6% completion, and 226 yards passing. The rushing attack combined for 137 yards rushing. Only 3.9 yards a carry is kind of disgusting, but it was effective, especially against this Saints unit. Terry McLaurin would get 73 receiving yards, and aforementioned 2 touchdown catches. As for the Saints, just a very weird pool of quarterbacks. Spencer Rattler and Cedric Wilson Jr. would have the only touchdown passes for Saints quarterbacks in this game. Meanwhile, Jake Haener, again, 4 of 10 passing for 49 yards and a pick. That doesn't even make any sense, dude. Only 69 yards for the Saints rushing overall. Alvin Kamara would be more effective in the receiving game, where he picked up 58 receiving yards and that aforementioned touchdown. Marquez Valdez-Scantling led the way with 64 receiving yards. And again, Foster Moreau had 39 receiving yards on 4 catches with the aforementioned touchdown catch on his end. That could have been the game-tying one, but hey, I do understand the decision. I get it completely. I have no contrast with that decision being made. Absolutely none. You had to understand that the Commanders were gonna be in prime position. Even just the mere 50-50 chance of them getting the ball and taking up all that time in overtime to then score the game winner was your worst nightmare. And so you had to quell all of that. Fuck that. And say, we're going to get it here. We're going to do this on our terms with our control in hand. It's that simple. There are a couple of bonus coverage games that did come on after the events of both Ravens-Giants and Saints-Commanders. So we will take a look at Dolphins, Texans, Spurs that came on CBS. Very slow-paced game from the way I was tracking it. Credit to the Texans defense, though. The Dolphins couldn't do shit. Every single time they believed they would have something going on, they were stopped in their tracks with stupid turnovers from Tagovailoa or just highly ineffective drives that led to punts. Similarly for the Dolphins defense. I mean, not necessarily an optimal performance for the Texans offense either. Their 181 combined yards to that point in the game were their lowest since they said the late 2000s, I believe. 2009? So with a Herculean effort like that, you at least expect them to be in the game still, which is exactly what happened. And they even did force C.J. Stroud to fumble on one of these possessions in the first half. Is Jordan Brooks, shout out the former Seahawk. He would force it, and I believe this is... Yeah, Jordan Brooks would get it, and Shaq Mason, the former Patriot, I didn't think he was a Dolphin to this point. I must have been really sleeping. He would tackle him, literally. At an ensuing drive, saw Tua Tagovailoa get intercepted by Kalen Bullock. Like, bruh. It just is beyond my understanding, man. But yes, the Dolphins were absolutely in this thing. It was only an 8-point ball game to open up the fourth quarter. And literally, the defense stopped the Texans every single time. Their longest possession in terms of yardage in this quarter was 26. So they did their job. And after every single one of these, they had a chance. They gave the ball up in the third quarter, the Texans, back to the Dolphins. And they had a chance to open up the fourth quarter and tie the game. An interception by Tua Tagovailoa to Derek Stingley Jr. for the first time. Another punt, but then you go 3 and out. Helped by Danielle Hunter being such a wrecking ball for any offensive line to deal with. I get it. But there's no way that if, again, you see what Tua Tagovailoa is getting paid. You see how much money is being allotted to him. And when you go out and you see him play, sometimes it just doesn't seem to match. Like a game like this against a good team, like that overtime win was cool. But this is one of the better teams in the league. And it's slated to be by most people. You have to rise to the occasion, and you don't. They go 3 and out again. And a very optimal chance with 1 minute and 44 seconds left to make anything happen. But you put it in harm's way again. Now, can I blame this interception fully on Tua Tagovailoa? No. Derek Stingley Jr. got him again, but Tyreek Hill did have the ball in his hands, and it was effectively ripped out. But the mere fact that you are even putting it in an area where a defender has a chance of getting to it is just irresponsible. And that lost them the game right there. Only a 20-12 victory for the Texans. A very low amount of yardage. But they won. Keep in mind, too, that the Dolphins ran 12 more plays and averaged the same amount of yards per play as the Texans. They were worse on third down, but somehow more effective on fourth down. They could not run the ball to save their lives. And with an offense that is predicated on running screen routes and a hell of a lot of motion plays to get the shifty weapons they have in space and try to spread a defense out. If you aren't rushing the ball effectively, you have no chance of opening those other things up. And that was their demise over the course of this game. Ultimately, that was their demise. 12 rushes for 41 yards from the leading man in Davon Aitchen. And this is the same individual that you're going to try to run Texas routes with and run motion routes in the flat to. You don't think they're going to be ready for that in some manner? Like, they've watched enough film to this point. And while, yes, it has worked effectively, Mike McDaniel may have to make some changes here. And even one of the pundits on ESPN pointed out that there may need to be some physicality added. There may need to be. Because in situations where you need mobility to disrupt the defense, well, Tua Tagovailoa certainly doesn't have that. So there has to be some element there that these defenders aren't expecting every time they come and they play Miami. Real talk. Tua Tagovailoa only finished with 196 yards and a touchdown with 3 picks. Also, it's just weird. Like Jonnu Smith, 9 catches for only 48 yards. Tyreek Hill, 36 yards receiving on 2 catches. Jalen Waddle didn't have a single catch. A hospital ball was thrown to Grant Dubose, and he was taken out of the game with injury. Also, anytime that you have a player like Malik Washington leading you in receiving yards, you're going to lose. You're going to lose. Again, I don't even need to go through the numbers for the Texans. It's just disgusting. Anytime Joe Mixon is leading you in receiving yards, you probably shouldn't win a ball game. And that's exactly what happens. Because the Dolphins were that much worse. And again, they could not, for the life of them, protect the football. The Texans, like I said, they will inevitably face the Ravens on Christmas. There's a good chance that they're going to have to, they're certainly going to have to clean that up. They understand that they cannot do that, especially with what happened in the AFC divisional game against the Ravens earlier in this year, but last season. Try that shit against them if you want to. It can get out of hand against the Ravens. Be advised. But at least they secure a victory. They remain atop the AFC South. Not too much you can ask for outside of that, if you're a Texans fan, I guess. The Jets and Jaguars would also be on Fox, weirdly enough, as a bonus coverage game. The mere fact that a quarterback battle between Aaron Rodgers and Mac Jones had this much back and forth, yeah, absolutely nobody saw this coming. No one. The mere highlight, though, is that Davante Adams with multiple contributions throughout this game, 2 touchdown catches, including a 71-yarder at the very beginning of the fourth quarter. Well, not the very beginning, but at the, in the meat of the fourth quarter. It would allow them to get the lead, and it would make Davante Adams the 12th player all-time to reach 100 touchdown catches. Prior to it getting on the bonus coverage, though, the Jaguars were actually driving, and they were in Jets territory with a chance to take the lead. But Mac Jones merely settles for the field goal, which was kicked in by Cameron Little to tie it up. Now, the Jets did have a chance to respond. They had the advantage in every aspect. All their timeouts were on deck. They didn't need to do anything too crazy. And yet, Davante Adams would get a 41-yard catch on 3rd and 5 on Jacksonville's 42-yard line to get them with a goal-to-go situation. And surely enough, Breece Hall would get in for a very short touchdown. He gave enough time for the Jaguars to respond, seeing as they had 2 timeouts left and a minute and 5 left to work with. While in any other situation with any other quarterback, teams would be licking their chops with this chance. This is ultimately Mac Jones we're dealing with here. And Sauce Gardner would get a layup. All he had to do was back up just a little bit, and he would intercept Mac Jones in Jets territory to end off the game. Aaron Rodgers would have almost another 300-yard game, but ended with just 289 yards, 3 touchdown passes. And he would also have 45 rushing yards for some reason to lead all rushers. Think about that. Davante Adams would have 9 receptions for 198 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Garrett Wilson would have 3 receptions for 56 yards and a touchdown. Those are the 2 guys you want to involve in the passing game, and combined, they had tremendous efforts. You couldn't have really asked for much better than that if you are a staffer on the offensive side of the ball for the Jets. Meanwhile, for the Jaguars, 294 yards passing for Mac Jones, 2 touchdowns and 2 picks. 136 combined rushing yards, though, with Travis Etienne Jr. managing to get 65 rushing yards, leading the way for them in that unit. Brian Thomas Jr. would set multiple Jaguars rookie receiver records with 10 receptions for under 5 yards and 2 touchdown catches in this game. Brenton Strange, who was stepping in for Evan Ingram, who is out for the season, would get 11 receptions for 73 yards. And Parker Washington would also get 3 receptions for 54 yards. A very unexpected game, if I do say so myself. But, I mean, I don't know. Like, okay. Man, that is just... Okay, I'm seeing a couple of things here that will certainly be interesting. One is obvious, and one is not necessarily, but I'll shift my focus to there later. Meanwhile, let's move on to the game of the week, technically speaking, or at least one of the games of the week, between the Bills and the Lions. So the game would start out with Lions 3-0. Should preface everything else by saying that there were only 4. And this one came on the very first drive of the game. So the Bills would get the ball back with a chance to assert themselves as a unit. And Ty Johnson, the former Lions running back, becomes a very important player to the outcome of this game almost immediately, as Josh Allen would throw on the run to him for a 33-yard gain off the rip, getting them into Lions territory. They would stall out for just a little bit, but on another third down, Ty Johnson getting involved yet again for a 24-yard catch. He would also get them down to the goal line with a 5-yard run before Josh Allen, the vulture, punched it in. That's very simple. The Lions would end up punting the ball again, as Jared Goff would be pressured by the likes of Ed Oliver and Dawan Smoot. When he is pressured, I'm going to stand on this, and a lot of people understand how true this really is. All he needs to do is get just a little bit of pressure surrounding him, and he falters every single time. So they would give the ball away. Starting out on that next drive, you would have James Cook get a 28-yard catch and run, getting a 3-yard run as well. Maybe it was his time to assert himself a little bit. Nope. Khalil Shakir got involved, and then it was the Josh Allen show from here on out. He would allow James Cook to take back the reins just a little bit with a combined 18 rushing yards on the next couple of plays before he would run a read option in for a 4-yard touchdown. Second one for Josh Allen at this point, and the 14-0 lead to open up the second quarter, where the Lions finally showed some signs of life. Jahmyr Gibbs picked up a couple of really good chunks of yardage for them to give them a first down and then make 2nd and 1 in midfield, where Amon-Ra St. Brown would get a 24-yard catch on Cole Bishop to end off the first quarter. Shortly thereafter, Jahmyr Gibbs would get activated yet again. Prior to 3rd down and 9, which would see Jared Goff throw a pretty solid pass to Tim Patrick for a 12-yard catch, getting them in the end zone for the first time. The Bills were not letting up, and again, Lions defense, we understand how banged up they are, and as I'll probably allude to in a little bit, they get even more banged up here. Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid would burn them over the middle, with Ty Johnson coming up yet again, this time on a 4th down and 2. That saw him get them deep in Detroit territory once again, right in the red zone. Another catch was made by him to pick up another first down and goal on Detroit's 6-yard line, where James Cook would punch it in from that yardage out. Jameson Williams wasn't going to let them just go out like this, though. Jameson Williams would manage to go ahead and get down the field. Keep in mind, too, that they introduced the fact that a 32-8 record over 40 games would be tied for the best 40-game stretch in Lions history. As I've stated previously, Dan Campbell has completely changed the culture of, the Detroit Lions football team. He has. There's no denying it. And if you really try to, I think you're just very much having PTSD from his introductory press conference. Like, there's just no way you can't look at the body of work and see all that he has managed to accomplish, and honestly, if things go a certain way, could potentially still accomplish to this point. That being said, they get themselves in a little trouble on 4th down and 4, but Amon-Ra St. Brown's got them, and he picks up 21 yards to extend that drive. You also get Jared Goff on a 3rd down on Buffalo's 25-yard line, scrambling for a 10-yard gain to pick up an easy 1st down. Definitely wasn't an easy run for him. The way that man runs it. Absolute madness. But, nonetheless, with a little bit of trickery, they would close the game down to a 7-point margin. Dan Skipper. Yes, that Dan Skipper would get in the end zone from 9 yards out. Actually managing to truck one of the Bills' defenders, too. Should get in. Kickers. You know how much of a waste it is for Josh Allen to do what he does to open up this Bills drive? Rolls out all the way to his right. Gets the shit rocked out of him by Quan Alexander. And he launches a fucking rocket to Keon Coleman, who makes a very impressive catch and run for a little bit to pick up 64 yards. And they nearly get in and score a touchdown, if not for some stupid penalties. This one on Dion Dawkins to push them back. And ultimately force 4th and goal from the 6-yard line. Tyler Bass misses a 24-yard field goal attempt. It's the shortest miss of this NFL season. One-upping Joey Slies' 25-yard miss. But the ineptitude at the kicking position was not done. First, you would see Sam Laporta get a 22-yard catch to open up the Lions' drive, though. They were driving down a little bit. Amon-Ra St. Brown would get them down to the 34-yard line by himself. But ultimately, a few incomplete passes to Jahmyr Gibbs and then Amon-Ra St. Brown would force the Lions to try to kick a field goal of their own. Maybe get this down to less than a touchdown ball game. Jake Bates decides to miss his field goal too, which is something that he had not done this season. But everybody, no matter who you are, I mean every single kicker is going through it. Everybody. The yips, whatever you want to call what's going on with all these kickers, it doesn't discriminate on anybody. It can happen to you too. So we would get into the 3rd quarter. And the onslaught of scoring from the Bills just continued from here. Nothing unusual. Todd Johnson, yet again, with another catch. This one from 19 yards out to get him into Buffalo. We'll get them out of Buffalo territory into plus territory yet again. At a certain point of time, the Bills did manage to have more plays in Lions territory than the Lions had overall plays. James Cook would take that mantle and just completely rob Josh Allen of a chance. He would get a 6-yard run before ultimately skating past everybody from 41 yards out for a touchdown of his own, but not before Kirby Joseph, over the course of this run, tries to tackle him by his dreads, grabbing them and trying to take him down. He didn't feel that shit at all, though. He stayed running. He stayed running, and he handled his business. And so you got to give him that. A couple punts would ensue, and then the Lions would have a chance to make something happen, but with a play to Amon-Ra St. Brown that was actually called a fumble, which was recovered by Matt Milano, that would end the momentum there. Despite them trying their hardest, nothing truly mattered. The Bills were going to continue to impose their will. The same team that had a quarterback in Josh Allen, who became the third player since 1994 with at least 250 passing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns in the first half, along with Mike Vick. That's just crazy, man. Like, you really just, I don't know. The numbers are just increasing from here on. So any debate just gets harder and harder to have. Like, man, that's gotta be so tough, bro. I don't know. Nonetheless, they get right into it with a very short field. Khalil Shakir manages to get in from 3 yards out for a touchdown catch. The Lions would attempt to respond, and there was a little bit of thrill in their attempt. We get down to 3rd and 17, and Amon-Ra St. Brown will get the pass from Jared Goff 16 yards out. But in a play that they had to have, he managed to break a couple tackles and get loose for what would eventually become a 66-yard reception touchdown and the quick score that they needed. 35-21 ball game. They still would allow the Bills to go down and get a field goal, though. But the Lions understood the assignment a little bit, and in just 2 minutes and 2 seconds, they would run 5 plays, including the likes of a 31-yard Sam Laporta catch, would eventually lead to a 12-yard reception touchdown by Jahmyr Gibbs. By this point, the defense will lose Aleem McNeil to this point as he was being tended to. They would try to get an onside kick, and this is where I believe the game was lost. Now, I do understand the side of the people who believe that it was the right call, but the way that I saw it, when you did not stop the Bills on your own volition during any point of this game, why are you giving them a shorter field to work with? At the very least, you got to try to make it somewhat harder on them to score. You can't give them a short field to work with. On the contrary, though, it can be stated that if they were to have gotten the ball in their own territory, they could methodically take off enough time to then score a touchdown and prevent the Lions from making any attempt at a comeback. So again, I don't agree with the call, but personally do understand the side of those who do like the move there. All it took for them was one play, and Ray Davis would have himself a touchdown to work with. The Lions would respond rather quickly, though. Another 3 minutes and 49 seconds led to another Jahmyr Gibbs touchdown. And then the Bills would get on the board yet again with Josh Allen making some plays to Dawson Knox. And then yet again to Khalil Shakir along with a scramble to get down to 1st and goal in their territory. There was almost a heavy amount of fuckery that took place. This man, Josh Allen, on 3rd down, almost threw a push pass for a touchdown to Dalton Kincaid. Literally, just using his full weight to push it straight in. Do you know how bad a defense has to be for a quarterback to revert to those tendencies at that point? It's atrocious. Luckily for them, it didn't count because there was holding and another penalty that would force them far back from even being able to get a touchdown. But if that shit had stood, everybody would have been off that team. Everybody who was involved in that play would have been off that team. And that certainly wouldn't have helped them given their situation. But, no, that couldn't happen. The Lions would score with 1 minute and 51 seconds off the clock on their drive. It took them all the way until 25 seconds to call their timeout, but I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to ensure that they could score quickly and both, if they needed to kick the ball off, ensure that they had a chance to get it back somehow. There were a few productive plays here, though. For instance, on this 4th down, with 40 seconds to go on Buffalo's 36-yard line, they had a very well-timed hook and ladder to Jahmyr Gibbs that would get them inside Buffalo's red zone. Very well-timed. Eventually, that kind of ingenuity would lead to Jameson Williams getting a 3-yard touchdown catch. The Lions would try another onside kick, and granted, they almost got it. They bull rushed Taron Johnson, and they almost fell on the ball, but through all the weight on him, he managed to keep full control of the ball, allowing the Bills to close out this very high-scoring game, 48-42. Josh Allen threw for 362 yards and 2 rushing touchdowns while adding 68 yards on the ground and 2 more rushing scores. The first player to account for both 5 passing and 5 rushing touchdowns over 2 game span. James Cook would have 105 yards on the ground and 2 touchdown runs on 14 carries. Ty Johnson led all wide receivers on the Bills with 5 catches and 114 yards. It's just insane. The penultimate revenge game. Like, that, it don't get much better than that, man. It truly doesn't. I'm not gonna lie to you. Also, in the case of the Bills, they became the very first team to both score 40 points without leading, and then 40 points without trailing in consecutive games in NFL history. They also became the second team in NFL history to score 40 points and allow 40 points in back-to-back ball games as well. Very different from the defensive matches we talked about earlier in the video. If you like offense, you loved this game. Jared Goff would have 494 passing yards of his own in 5 passing touchdowns. The rushing attack was non-existent, which made sense, and a lot of people made this point as to their belief that the Bills played as perfect of a defensive game as they could, because the Lions, being one of the most effective rushing attacks, were held to just 3.2 yards a carry on 15 and 48 total rushing yards as a unit, forcing their hand and forcing the Lions to play out of their element a little bit, rendering them a little less effective. Still, to allow more than 500 yards of offense to any team, like, can one really believe that they put forth their best effort? I don't know. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 14 receptions, career high and franchise high, I believe, with 193 receiving yards and a touchdown in this game. Samuel Porto also had 7 receptions for 111 yards. No defense whatsoever. The Bills continue to maintain their lead and continue to keep their hopes alive of securing a 1 seed, while the Lions, at the very least, clinched a playoff berth already. So they're set, you know. Moving on to the Steelers and Eagles. Coming into the game, Russell Wilson had been the winningest quarterback against the Eagles without a loss since 1970, as he had won his first 6 matchups against the squad. It wasn't going to be that easy from the very jump. The Eagles let them know that almost immediately, because the Steelers still could not run the fucking ball. Still not run the ball. The issue for the Eagles was passing, so they started out with 3 straight passes to Grant Calcaterra, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith before even thinking about involving Saquon Barkley, which was a no game. They would stall out from there, mustering up just a few more yards before settling from a field goal for Jake Elliott. Multiple miscues would ensue. They would punt the ball multiple times to Steelers. In betwixt that was a fumble on the hands of the Eagles and Jalen Hurts, with TJ Watt doing what he does best and forcing it. Now they would punt again before Cooper DeJean would actually fumble the punt. You would think that with a short field starting out in the Eagles' red zone, that a touchdown would be scored by the Steelers. But a penalty followed by multiple incomplete passes made them settle for a field goal here, tying up the ball game, but not doing nearly enough damage to the Eagles. And so, what do you know? Now, A.J. Brown would get catches of 16 and 20 yards on this drive, and Saquon Barkley would even get a 22-yard run here. From 5 yards out on 2nd and goal, A.J. Brown would catch it right over the middle from Jalen Hurts. They would do a little dance to try and silence all the critics, and they would take a 7-point lead to get in the second quarter, where more of the same from the Steelers would ensue. Just getting some decent, and I mean very decent, not overwhelming contributions from their wide receiver talent before not doing a single thing in the rushing attack, making them somewhat one-dimensional. And it is their downfall. It is literally their downfall. A.J. Brown would get in here once again. Before Devontae Smith would get the reins this time and get a touchdown catch from 2 yards out. The Steelers would finally respond, and started out with a Ben Skoranek 17-yard contribution for some reason. Maybe it's exactly what they needed, though. Russell Wilson would activate the legs a little bit to pick up a first down, getting them into a first and goal situation from their 8-yard line. A couple downs later on 3rd and 9, Pat Freiermuth would get the touchdown catch to make it a 7-point ball game. Another punt, and the Steelers would shorten things up. The field goal before it was taken to the half. The second half was dominated by the Eagles. Dominated. Just peep everything that I am about to show to you. Okay? Because to open up the third quarter, the Eagles would have very much kicked a field goal with about 9 minutes and 45 seconds left to go in the quarter. If not for Montravius Adams and I believe Keanu Benton absolutely fucking up the long snapper Rick Lovato, he got fucked over completely, and they were penalized for it. They were able to extend the drive for just a little bit longer and would kick a field goal with an attempt being just a mere 7 yards shorter, but with only 7 minutes and 55 seconds left in the quarter now. You would think that there would be a sense of urgency for the Steelers to at least go down and score. That's, I guess, we can say that some people got the idea and some people did not. Russell Wilson would get it down to Calvin Austin for a 31-yard gain, getting them inside Philadelphia's 40-yard line, before Jaylen Warren would get them even closer. They would pick up a first down after Najee Harris' 7-yard run before he fucked up. Now, the box score, which I am referring to here, will tell you that Russell Wilson fumbled this ball. When you watch the footage, he pitched it on a sweep pass, well, just a routine sweep pitch, to Najee Harris, to the right side. He fumbled the pitch. It was in his hands, and he fumbled it. And Darius Slay Jr. would subsequently recover it. From there, they would go on a touchdown drive that would take it all the way to the early fourth quarter, where tush push happened. Because you already understand that was bound to happen. Literally. The Steelers, for whatever reason, which I did not come to understand this, 4th and 7 on their own 46-yard line. I understand, right? But you have to get points on the board. So the fact that Corliss Waitman would punt this football here made absolutely no sense to me. And we can quite literally say that this effectively ended the ball game. It ended it. the Eagles would pull all the stops out, while also not trying their hardest to really do much of anything. The ball was completely in their court. Completely in their court. All timeouts on deck. No need to use any of them, though. Let's just run this into the ground completely. There were only a few passes on this drive. And over the course of this drive, if the sheer time they were on the field wasn't bad enough, which I'll allude to in a second, it gets worse when you factor in that TJ Watt would go down with an injury and be taken out of the ballgame. After the 2-minute warning, all they had to do was kneel the game out, and by the end of it, with the remaining 10 minutes and 29 seconds being taken off of the clock, they would work their way down the field for a 21-play, 89-yard drive. All because this man decided to punt the football. As soon as they punted the ball, they gave that game away. And the Eagles took more than full advantage of that. Absolutely atrocious work. Yet still, somehow with losing this game and becoming 10-5, the Steelers did clinch. Because of the Dolphins' loss and another team that I will mention in just a second. They did clinch. So they're going to be a playoff team. But let me tell you something right now. When you are in a situation where, again, yes, the 128 rushing yards, passing yards don't look the best for Russell Wilson. I understand it. But seriously, that is all good. My focus is with the rushing attack. My problem is with the rushing attack. Only 56 yards rushing with 3.3 yards a carry. You try that shit in the playoffs against the defense? You're not getting anywhere like this. So there has to be something they figure out here. Because that is unacceptable. I mean that. As for Jalen Hurts, though, one of his better passing games of the entire season, with 290 yards, passing, 2 touchdowns, and 78.1% completion. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith combined for 19 receptions and 209 yards. 219 yards receiving, and 2 touchdown catches. It was a down game for Saquon Barkley, as he would have just 65 yards rushing in this game. When you think about it, though, the Steelers coming in, the rush was one of their strong suits. Their ability to stop the run was one of their strongest attributes throughout this season. They're one of the best units in that regard. So Saquon Barkley was bound to run into a wall at some point, and it was here. He could be very much set to still break the rushing record over the course of the next few games, because every one of those run defenses are much weaker. Much, much weaker. So he'll be fine in that regard. I'll sweat there. A gritty win by the Eagles as they went on their 10th consecutive win, which is a great milestone in their franchise's history as well. We'll move on to the dual Monday Night Football action. But I'm not going to lie to you. When it comes to either one of these games, the Bears versus the Vikings and the Falcons versus the Raiders, I feel as though it's probably best to just talk about both in their entirety. Because, let's face it, for just a second, shall we? I don't even know why I gave either one of these games the merit, the effort, the time to even take down little tidbits here and there on the happenings of the game. Because let's face it, with the way that these teams managed to play on Monday night, there is honestly a good chance that both of these games were already set in stone before they even fucking started. Especially this Bears-Vikings match. Especially this. Caleb Williams would extend the NFL rookie record with 286 consecutive passes without an interception. The offense still only managed to muster 12 points. And even for a brief period of time, he was limping off the field because he was dealing with brief injuries and getting the wind knocked out of him because his old lineman couldn't block for shit. It has been a struggle for them all season. He was literally getting killed out there. He was going to die out there. Even with them just getting 2 sacks on him, it felt like he was getting pressured all night long. It did not help that they had a backup left tackle in. The worst possible outcome would ensue. If the blindside blocker is the most important position for multiple lines in the NFL, it's the most important position. And you're asking a backup to carry on that task of handling some of the better edge rushers in the league, like a Jonathan Grenard. He cooked them. Jahad Ward managed to even get past him, get a free shot on Caleb Williams that knocks him down and knocks the wind out of him. The Vikings offense, for a little while, was relatively quiet, and even then, they still understood they were going to be just fine. Just fine. Ultimately, this game would finish with Sam Darnold getting 231 passing yards and a touchdown with an interception. Aaron Jones would manage to get 86 rushing yards and a touchdown, while Cameron Akers would get his first rushing touchdown since Week 5. Justin Jefferson would also have a markedly better game against the Bears than he did in his first go-around, getting 73 receiving yards and a touchdown on 7 catches. TJ Hawkinson would also have 5 receptions for 52 yards. Meanwhile, for the Bears, again, not necessarily optimal numbers in terms of just 191 yards and 58.1% completion. But there's just a litany of problems. They can't block in the passing game, and they can't run. I don't care about this saying that DeAndre Swift has 19 rushes for 79 yards in this ballgame. Not when it counted. Not when they desperately needed the yardage. On multiple plays. On the first drive of this game, they turned the ball over on downs because they could not pick up the yardage they needed to. For whatever reason, they decided to pitch it. But then on the second quarter, opening up their drive, one that saw them take 7 fucking minutes off the clock, they get in a similar spot trying to run it up the middle, and this man, DeAndre Swift, runs it into his own lineman and fails to convert. So don't watch the box score and think that he had a productive game. He did not. got to keep it stacked. Keenan Allen would try his best, though. 6 reception, 82-yard, and touchdown output, including some pretty impressive catches. A 20-yarder that saw him completely extend for the ball. Like, you gotta respect that. And there's, certainly over these past few games, he's showing you why they went out to go and get him in free agency. But if only those talents could be a little more realized by most everybody. If only, man. And I don't even want to get started on this Falcons-Raiders game. Do I really want to do this? I really want to do this shit, bro. I mean, literally, just a roller coaster. All you had to do is just enjoy the ride, man. And enjoy it. That's all. That's all I have to say for this one. Like, you had the Raiders taking the first drive of the game to fumble. As D. Alford, for whatever reason, managed to make a pretty solid play. And given what the hell he did last week, I don't know why I expected him to even get there. But okay, so be it. Couple plays before that, though, they try a weak-ass flea flicker that gets snuffed out completely by the defense. Multiple punts went into before Kirk Cousins would break the streak and throw his very first touchdown in 5 games. 30-yarder to Drake London. The Raiders would get on the board with a field goal, surprisingly. And then the Falcons would punt. For whatever reason. Because they literally had Younghoe Koo out on the fucking field and decided to try to bluff and deliberately push themselves back further to punt the ball. Yes, Younghoe Koo has had a rough season, but you don't trust him that much that you're willing to just use him as a decoy. What the fuck? Like, all you had to do was kick a field goal. And let that be the end of that. Revisionist history will allow Raheem Morris to look like a genius for doing that. You want to know why? Because the very next play, they lose yardage. And then lose more yardage. On the heart of Alexander Madison. For a safety. Even with the safety punt, allowing the Falcons to get respectable field position, they don't do anything with it and punt the ball away. Moving it to the end of the half. Just a 9-3 ball game, man. Not to mention the special teams. Special teams just got absolutely ridiculous and out of hand. I mean, seriously. Like, on that drive, man. You would actually have Kadero Hodge earlier in the game managing to block a punt. Now, it wasn't listed as such, but he was influenced by so many of the elite gunners before him, I guess. And after, on the first play from scrimmage in the second half, Kirk Cousins throws a pick to fucking Robert Spillane. After a few plays, because of course the Raiders didn't do shit with that, he would assert himself again. Now, he would block the kick, and you would once more have another fucking special teamer put their hands on the fucking ball, allowing the Raiders to recover it and pick it up for what could have been a first down. Now, I left out one thing. The difference between what happened there and what happened with Oruwariye last week is that it did not travel past the first down. It did not travel past the line of scrimmage. It did not. If not for that, that play would have been even more disastrous than it already fucking was. But they got lucky because it was still behind the line of scrimmage past to that point. And for Divine Diablo to have actually pulled off the successful attempt at regaining first down for the Raiders, he would have had to have picked it up and ran all the way down to the Falcons' 44-yard line to pick up the first down. He only made it 3 yards. And so the Falcons were granted a chance. They only mustered a field goal out of it. That's how you pay back a man in Kadero Hodge doing all that for you. You scored just a field goal. Wow. More punts. And then the last bit of scoring from the Falcons would come on a field goal on a drive that took up 7 plays and 18 fucking yards. They would have this man Younghoe Koo kick. He would get it in. That was their scoring for the night. With a Desmond Ridder interception caught by Justin Simmons, the game could have been over if not for Younghoe Koo missing a 42-yarder. And then the Raiders displayed some signs of life. Desmond Ridder for the first time of the night. Because keep in mind that Raiders wide receivers prior to this particular drive had 3 targets and no catches. So, to shut people up, at least that's what the hell he might have been thinking, he decided to hit Trey Tucker and Jakobi Meyers on the first 3 plays of that drive. And then Jakobi Meyers and Harris Marshall Jr. on the next couple after a sack. Before getting it to Amir Abdullah on multiple occasions, eventually scoring from 5 yards out. And the PAT would be blocked. With a chance to close out the game, you would think that the Falcons would dial up some of their better plays. Nope. And they would be penalized too, for what it's worth, to give the Raiders 1 minute and 56 seconds to work with. Now, they had no timeouts. But they were going to try their hardest to move the ball down the field. And surely enough, there were a lot of short passes. So it was looking like they weren't going to get there. But with the help of Jakobi Meyers and others, they did eventually get down to Atlanta's 35-yard line. With about 10 seconds left to go. 2 shots would be attempted, and they would result in 2 misses. Near misses. Brock Bowers and Harris Marshall Jr. had chances to get the first one. And on the second one, there were a fair pool of guys surrounding the ball. But ultimately, Jesse Bates III would make the play in the back of the end zone to cap off the shitty-ass game and the shitty-ass doubleheader that ESPN tried to promote. How dare they? How dare they, man? shit was just not good, man. I gotta be honest here, bro. They really thought that was gonna be the shit, man. No. A game in which you see Kirk Cousins throw just 17 passes, throw for just 112 yards, and throw a touchdown and an interception. That's fucking terrible, man. Bijan Robinson, probably the best player on the field in yesterday's game, had 22 rushes for 125 yards. Meanwhile, Desmond Ridder had 208 yards in a game where he was trying his hardest to get revenge, completed just 59% of his passes, threw a touchdown and threw 2 picks, while also being the best rusher the Raiders had to offer in this game with 28 yards. And the most effective with 5.6 yards a carry. They need to find more running backs. I was saying how Sincere McCormick needed to be involved a little more, and he proceeds to go out, get 7 rushes and 8 yards. Again, Jacoby Myers had 59 receptions, 59 yards receiving on 5 receptions. But I gotta say, anytime that he is leading you like a wide receiver, number 1, in this kind of yardage, you may be in some trouble. That is an understatement for the Raiders offense, to be completely honest with you. As they move to 2-12, lose their 10th straight ball game. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. Why? Like, who signed off on that shit? Like, I'm not gonna lie, bro. Like, listen, man. I can't hold you, bro. Like, maybe there's a chance that the Packers-Seahawks game, there was probably no choice to flex that. But if I am the schedule makers, I'm making them push back the Falcons-Raiders game to a 4:05 slate on Sunday. I'm not allowing that to see primetime on Monday Night Football. Like, don't even worry about the doubleheader to try to get these niggas to profit. Don't even worry about showing that game. Just let it be Bears-Vikings and let that be the end of it. Me personally. With a win, though, the Falcons are still in the very thick of the NFC South. That trash-ass division. But alright, we'll move on into some other action in just a second. So, starting out with this Chiefs vs. Browns game, it is safe to say, when looking at everything, that ultimately, it wasn't one of the signature Chiefs games of this season, in the essence of it being a close victory. There was no doubt that the Chiefs would win this one. If anything, the Browns, with a lone 62-yard touchdown run by Jerome Ford for whatever reason, merely sold the masses the illusion of competitive spirit. There was nothing much they really could do, and it did not help them that they were down Nick Chubb after he suffered an injury and was taken out of this ballgame. Jameis Winston is exactly who he is, despite Harrison Butker actually managing to miss a 29-yard field goal. Even he, just coming back from an injury, is not safe from the overall ineptitude of these kickers in the NFL during the season. It is insane at this point, man. I don't understand it. The most pressing development to come from this game was not the fact that the Chiefs were able to get this win. I mean, again, there's no surprise there. Main issue was what came during this game. after a drive that saw them turn the ball over on downs in the fourth quarter, Patrick Mahomes would be taken out with injury, a knee injury, a very bad knee injury that I saw in post as I did not watch the game live. Obviously, why would anybody waste their time watching that game live? Let's be completely honest with you. They initially said that he would be slated or looked at on a week-to-week basis for his injury. That is the furthest extent of knowledge that they have given the overall media on his timetable. They hope, at the very least, that he can return for their matchup on Saturday against none other than the Texans. But it is just a waiting game at this point. As for how they did collectively, though, I mean, this is probably, in terms of when he actually played, one of his worst games. Just 50% completion. He didn't turn the ball over, but I mean, no. You think of a lot better accuracy than that when you think about Patrick Mahomes. Man. He did throw 2 touchdown passes. Xavier Worthy did also get in on a rushing touchdown, while also leading in receiving yards with 46. Try this on for size. Browns quarterbacks Jameis Winston and Dorian Thompson-Robinson combined for almost as many interceptions as yards per fucking attempt. 4 interceptions and 4.8 yards per pass attempt. The fact that I can even make that comparison. Jerry Jeudy has been one of the only bright spots on this Browns team. He would have 11 receptions for 108 yards in this game to give him his first ever 1,000-yard season as a wide receiver. He has only seen the end zone 4 times this season, but it's one of the better years he's had, and I will give him respect for that. Now, would this grant him a Pro Bowl? I don't know. The Browns, as good as he has been playing himself, the Browns are, again, they're eliminated from the playoffs. They're not even remotely competitive in this bowl game. I don't know. Especially when you're comparing it to some of the other AFC wide receivers who people tend to prefer. They're doing way better off with their respective teams. And they have comparable seasons with more scores in some instances. So, I mean, I don't know. But I can give it respect for that. Meanwhile, for the interceptions here, you have Brian Cook and Jordan Hicks getting one, Trent McDuffie getting one, and then also Nick Bolton. Shout out to Nick Bolton. Moving on to the Cowboys and Panthers. It almost went just exactly how I thought it would have. You get Bryce Young reverting back to his own ways with a few turnovers of his own. But quite the optimal sequence with the Cowboys being up 10-0. You have Cooper Rush fumbling, and then the Panthers scoring an 83-yard touchdown with a catch by Jalen Coker, and then missing the field goal to end off the first half. Unfortunately, though, again, Bryce Young tapped back into that repressed element as he would fumble the ball to open up the third quarter. The Cowboys would then score a touchdown. Jalen Tolbert would get in, and more empty possessions would lead to more Cowboys points. Touchdown by Brooks, a field goal before the Panthers would finally respond with another touchdown by Bryce Young here. Ultimately, by that point, the game was done, as he would throw an interception to Israel Mukuamu, and then the Cowboys would end off the ball game here. Cooper Rush would have 214 yards and 3 passing touchdowns, with Rico Dowdle also managing to get nearly 150 yards on the ground by himself for some reason. He didn't get in the end zone, though. CeeDee Lamb had 9 receptions for under 16 yards and a touchdown. As for the Panthers, 219 yards passing, a touchdown and 2 interceptions for Bryce Young. Though again, 67.9% completion is much better. I would have to have seen some of the passes that he's thrown. But of course, I did not watch the game. I will not hold you. They didn't have it broadcasted, and maybe that's for good reason. Jalen Coker would lead Panthers receivers with 110 overall yards and the aforementioned touchdown. Alright, moving on to Bengals and Titans. The Titans do this shit all the time. They do this shit all the time. They start out hot, and then they just cool down. They cool down. Despite the Bengals and Joe Burrow doing their best efforts to give them chance after chance to work with, man. Like this man, Joe Burrow, would fumble on 2nd and goal in Tennessee's 9-yard line with T'Vondre Sweat activating Derrick Henry energy. Literally on the next drive, Will Levis fumbles himself. Like, what kind of contest is this, man? And I don't want to hear about Will Levis being accurate in this first portion of this ball game because they were relegating him to throwing short passes and shit. Like, literally, the Bengals would go down to score a touchdown with Sam Hubbard. I didn't see the play, but again, shout out to the Ohio State man making the play. You know what I'm saying? Shout out. Nigga would throw 2 fucking consecutive interceptions that will lead to 10 straight Bengals points at the end of the half. One to Cameron Taylor-Britt that was followed up by a T. Higgins 38-yard touchdown. And then another one to Mike Hilton that was capped off by an Kate York field goal. Evan McPherson's not back yet. I'm thinking, but he not back yet. That would end off the half. Let's trade, said Joe Burrow and Will Levis, as Burrow, would throw a pick to Darryl Worley, who I didn't know was still in the league. And then he would one-up that Will Levis by throwing a 39-yard pick six to Geno Stone. Then fumble on the next fucking drive. Then throw games are just ridiculous. Because yes, while Tony Pollard did fumble this football, and while Jordan Battle did recover it on what could have been a scoop and 6, this nigga decided to fumble the ball by being stupid, trying to celebrate too early, and just letting the ball drop. And it went out of bounds. So it was a touchback. The Titans get the ball right back. Because Will Levis was doing so bad to the point where Mason Rudolph had to step in. And even he would get picked off by the TCU rookie, Josh Newton. They would punt the Bengals, and then Titans and Bengals would trade touchdowns. But by that point, bro, the Bengals had full control of that. Nobody was fazed by that at all. 3 touchdowns and 2 picks for Joe Burrow. 271 yards passing. 97 rushing yards for Chase Brown. 94 receiving yards for Jamar Chase. And again, at least T. Higgins with a 38-yard touchdown catch and 88 overall yards. They found him again. He's not a ghost anymore. Mason Rudolph would do a pretty good job, though, despite that interception, I guess. The 2 touchdown passes and 209 yards look promising, if not for the sole fact that they came in garbage time. But anything for this Titans offense is better than absolutely nothing, which is what Will Levis was providing them with. Like, you mean to tell me that this dude started out the game, I believe, like 8 of 8 passing, and then this man went on to throw 4 incomplete passes, 3 of them being picks, and still have just under 100 yards passing. Embarrassing. Tajay Spears would lead with 87 receiving yards and a touchdown. Anytime that is happening on a team that sees Calvin Ridley getting paid one of the more expensive wide receiver contracts in the league, on a team that has Tyler Boyd trying to get his revenge against the Bengals, and on a team that fields Chigoziem Okonkwo, there's a problem there. Not to mention that Nick Westbrook-Akina also had one of the best, somehow, touchdown to catch ratios, and only mustered 2 catches for 9 receiving yards in this one. Just absolute shame, man. But we move on to the Bucs and Chargers. All I gotta say is Mike Evans is in prime position, and I mean prime position, to get that 1,000-yard threshold, man. He's there. He's right on it. This game, in and of itself, was competitive for a little while, but then the Buccaneers just started running away with it completely. And the Chargers, through all of their best efforts, failed to convert, simply. They had multiple possessions down here in the fourth quarter that led to a turnover on downs. They fumbled the ball on a possession here. It was already 40-17 at that point, but it all got started with Justin Herbert throwing his first interception in quite some time to Jamel Dean. And they would score 17 unanswered points from there. So let's talk about everybody else first. May as well. Baker Mayfield threw for 288 yards and 4 touchdown passes with only a single interception on 81.5% completion. Bucky Irving, the real running back, won with 15 rushes for 117 yards. Jalen McMillan has managed to emerge as a pretty solid contributor in the absence of Chris Godwin, and could be very useful as a tertiary option amongst those guys at some point, with 5 receptions for 75 yards and a touchdown. Rachaad White also added a touchdown catch very late in the game. But ultimately, Mike Evans leading all receivers in the game with 9 receptions for 159 yards and 2 touchdowns, bringing him to a grand total of 749 yards and 9 touchdowns on the season. Now, let's take a look at this, shall we? The Bucs have a few more games left, just 3 more games left. And Mike Evans already has overexceeded the average he needs to eventually break the 1,000-yard threshold. And again, he has games against Dallas, against Carolina, and against Saints, who don't have Marshall Lattimore anymore. All of those defenses, he is more than capable of torching. And in all of those games, he would need somewhere around at least 83 to 84 yards in each of them. And that's just the bare minimum. Knowing that he can go off against pretty much every one of these teams. Barring anything crazy. They're certainly, I think that a lot of the people in Tampa Bay understand this too. So it's not to say that they won't be trying to game plan to get Mike Evans good looks. They know what's on the line here. And especially against these teams, I think it's easy to execute. So we'll continue watching that. Meanwhile, for Justin Herbert, he had 195 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Chargers still have no run game without J.K. Dobbins. They didn't really have one with him. But he adds a bit more of rushing ability than these other guys right now. They combined for 11 rushes and just 32 yards. Ladd McConkey and Quentin Johnston got the only touchdowns for the Chargers in this game, while this random tight end managed to get 50 receiving yards. Also, for the only pick caught by the Chargers defense, that would go to Tarheeb Still, who continues to have a respectable season at the cornerback position in the absence of Asante Samuel Jr. Moving on to Pats Cardinals. This is yet another game that was not really as competitive as you may think. It was a 30-10 ball game by the end of the fourth quarter with James Conner punching it in. It really wasn't that competitive. Ironically enough, the Patriots opened up the game with a missed field goal to pay tribute to Chad Ryland. Once more, again, while this could be attributed to a little bit of garbage time, Drake May, just 4 incomplete passes, an interception, but 82.6% completion percentage and 202 passing yards. The flashes are there, but they still have yet to really string a complete ball game together with him. Ramondre Stevenson, though, did have one of his better performances in a while, with 69 rushing yards on 13 carries. Kendrick Bourne would lead all Patriots wide receivers with 44 receiving yards, while Demario Douglas would catch the only passing touchdown of the ball game. As for the Cardinals, I don't know why they keep giving Clayton Tune different reps in certain situations. Now, it didn't come back to hurt them. It didn't come back to bite them here. But it's just like, why? If Kyler Murray's healthy, like, why are you rolling out Clayton Tune? Why? Either way, Murray had 224 passing yards. No passing touchdowns. James Conner had 110 yards on the ground and 2 rushing touchdowns with 16 carries as well. The touchdown, one of the other touchdowns scored in the ballgame for the Cardinals would come early, late in the first quarter, when Jonah Williams actually managed to recover a fumble in the end zone. That was initially forced by Anthony Jennings of the Patriots defense. It was just that kind of day for them, though. Now that can happen, yeah, they didn't stand much of a chance as it was. Trey McBride in this game would have 9 receptions for 87 yards to lead the way for everyone. He still has yet to log a receiving touchdown in this season, which is a crime. He's had one of the better seasons for a tight end this year. And with all pro selections, I guess they probably do a little better of a job accounting for more than just the scores. They'll look into a person's blocking ability and things like that. But when you have just one rushing touchdown on the season as a tight end, I don't know how he could really make, like he could, but I feel like with other performances from tight ends in the NFC, depending on how that looks like, it feels to me like it would be difficult to give him a spot in there without any score. I mean, taking a look, like he's literally, when it comes to tight ends, the second most productive tight end in the National Football League when it comes to yardage. Like, I'm not saying that he should not be an All-Pro or a Pro Bowler. I think he very much deserves it. But I don't know how some of these dudes think. I really don't. It's like, it's just hard for me to really believe that some of these people will look at the fact that he has not scored at his pure position and still grant him a spot in those respects, man. I don't see it. I can't lie to you. Moving on finally to Colts Broncos. I ain't gonna lie, yes, the Colts were up 13-7, and yes, it did not help at all that this man, Jonathan Taylor, after Bo Nix threw the third of his 3 interceptions in this ballgame to Nick Cross, Jonathan Taylor is out here fumbling the ball. Like, look, I get that looks bad. I get it. I get it, man. But at the same time, man, it looks terrible that Jonathan Taylor decided to go and celebrate too early and fumble the ball out of bounds on a very deep rushing touchdown. I get that. I get that, man. But when it comes down to it, it's overall offensive ineptitude. You have Michael Pittman here fumbling the football early in the third quarter here. And then you got fucking niggas trying to run a goddamn trying to execute a passing play to the wide receiver that gets blown up. And then for whatever reason, you have Adonai Mitchell trying to throw the ball back across the field, where Nick Bonito, one of the more elite edge rushers the NFL has had to offer this season, lurks the fuck out of him and gets a 50-yard. Do we call it a pick six? Do we call it a scoop six? Don't know. But he got the defensive touchdown to continue to exacerbate the scoring here. To add more insult to injury, Anthony Richardson threw another pick to Patrick Surtain II. Like, I don't want to hear anybody blaming this on Jonathan Taylor. It goes deeper than that. It goes way deeper than that. When you have a man in Anthony Richardson, who again, yes, he needs all the reps possible. And he should very much be finishing out the season. But when you have this man in the game, completing just 44.7% of his passes, and 2 picks were thrown by this man as well, you're not going to win anything. You're not going to win shit. Some of the passes were just easy misses that every quarterback should be able to make no matter who you are. And then a lot of these other ones are him just being too aggressive. Like, that is on him. Jonathan Taylor, despite that fumble, still performed well with 107 rushing yards of his own on 22 carries. Everybody else, literally, it wasn't one person, it was the other, just doing some absolute bullshit. And I'm not about to absolve the Broncos from anything either. They got some favorable special teams plays to help them out. A 60-yard punt return at some point by Marvin Mims Jr. allowed them to get a good score. But for Bo Nix to win a ball game where he throws 3 picks and throws for just 130 yards is absolutely atrocious. And you mean to tell me that we're supposed to watch a Thursday night football game between this nigga and Justin Herbert and the Chargers? Who honestly wants to see that when these players are playing like this? Who the fuck is going to watch that, man? No Broncos receiver had more than 33 yards receiving. And this man, Bo Nix, happened to pass to 9 different receivers. Courtland Sutton only led the way with 32 receiving yards. It's not to say that they even ran the ball effectively, because they did not at all. Just 2.7 yards a carry and 72 total rushing yards. That ain't shit, man. But they managed to win the game 31-13. I wonder why. And who, again, yes, the Jonathan Taylor play was atrocious. But who does that ultimately fall on? The leader, the supposed leader of the football team. No matter how young he is. That just can't happen. But with that being said, off of the action from the terms of the games, man, a lot happened. You had some competitive ones in here. There were some Game of the Year candidates similar to last week, but you still had some bullshit going on all around. And to get into some of these other developments, we get into more unfortunate territory, starting out with the fact that David Montgomery tore his MCL and will miss the rest of the season. The Lions now have 16 different players on IR. Starting caliber players. Backup players for those starting caliber players. It is a shit show down there right now when it comes to the conditioning unit down there. And a lot of these injuries as well, it's not even a matter of conditioning. A lot of them are just unfortunate. Some of them were non-contact. Some of them are just happening on very rough plays. I don't know. Everything is just going wrong down there. Because Carlton Davis III even managed to get a fractured jaw and he'll miss time. Like, they have such a good team in place, and it's crumbling at the seams. While they still have a chance to secure a 1 seed, and get to the playoffs, make the Super Bowl or the trip to the Super Bowl for the NFC run through Detroit, they are very embattled right now. I'll tell you what. Devondre Campbell would be suspended for 3 games, which I find rather interesting because let's just put things in perspective here. You're suspending Devondre Campbell Sr. for 3 games for walking off the field. So that holds as much weight, and that is equal to the suspension for an individual that knocked somebody's head off and knocked him unconscious on the field in Azeez Al-Shaair. How in the world is that possibly consistent? How is that possibly understandable to people? How can they? How does that make sense? I really want to know. Those situations are totally different. And with more clarity on the situation, it seemed like the 49ers were just set to really hinder Devondre Campbell Sr.'s ability to do much of anything. Because if he were to have been cut originally in interwaivers, another team could just pick him up over the course of the next few days. And he was also feeling away, apparently, because of the fact that if he had taken enough reps over the course of the season, he could acquire a bonus. And recognizing that this could not come to form, per se, with Dre Greenlaw out there, he decided to just get out, even though by entering the field in the first place, he could have secured it and helped his team get the victory. But that's neither here nor there. Knowing that if he were to have been picked up anywhere else, he could go and get that bonus from them. They just decided to reprimand him in this way. But again, it just seems like there's just no way to equate walking off the football field during the middle of a game to getting someone's head knocked off and rendering them unconscious on the field. Those two things are far from equal. So you can't even treat that as such. Either way, with a suspension, I would say just suspend his pay. Don't worry about making him miss all this time like this. From their perspective, I guess it's optimal. But, again, those things are not on par with each other. So we can't do that. Diontae Johnson and the Ravens would mutually agree for some reason for him to be excused from team activities, and it's unlikely that he'll appear in the game on Saturday against his former fucking team. I don't know why Diontae Johnson is doing half of this stuff. And it doesn't seem like, he's produced with them anyways. I get that part. But this is a Ravens problem. Why even bother picking him up via a trade and giving up a reasonable draft spot to go and get him? Only for him to not even produce or want to produce for you anymore, it seems like. That's just a very bad spot to put yourself in if you are a member of that front office. Yesterday, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the former first-round pick by the Kansas City Chiefs in the 2020 NFL Draft, at the very end of the first round, would be waived by them they have given reps to Kareem Hunt, Carson Steele, and Isaiah Pacheco. I guess they understood that there was probably not a lot of room left to allow for Edwards-Helaire to remain part of this team. And especially with the fact that another development in the belief that Marquise Brown can very much come back this season and return. So they took him off of IR and have allowed him to begin practicing. There was no need of having Edwards-Helaire anymore. They had to remove a player off the team in the notion of taking someone off of IR. With that action, he had to go. It was that simple. There are a couple of other developments here, so we're going to look at the fact that the Saints believe that Derek Carr is unlikely to return in this season. I mean, the Saints' season is effectively finito. They're not in prompt position to do much of anything. They can merely hope to see what they have in Spencer Rattler. Yet again. For the second stretch of time this season. Like, I figured that he would not be able to come back this season. So it doesn't totally surprise me. I just don't know why he did what he did to get himself injured in the first place. It's beyond my understanding. And then, finally, you have Aidan Hutchinson coming out and saying that he could be on track for a return at some point in the playoffs. He alludes to the fact that he could potentially make a return in the postseason if need be, possibly the Super Bowl. I would say that if you're the Lions, you can't be so heavily reliant on that. You have to try to secure the bye, I would say. Because a lot of these injuries are not necessarily, I don't believe that they are all season ending. But a good portion of them are. So at most, you would probably be getting just a few guys back anyways. You have to roll into the playoffs with the belief that this could be your roster going into the playoffs. You have to understand that. And you have to operate with that mindset. You can't try to hold out hope for something that could be implausible. You can't rely on that. You have to go with what you know. And with who you have. That's how this thing works. When it gets down to the brass tacks. But that'll do it for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.